Good afternoon. We'll go ahead and call to order the regular meeting of the City of Murfreesboro Board of Zoning Appeals for January 28, 2009. First item on the agenda is consideration of minutes for the regular meeting of December 22, 2008. Those minutes are included with the agenda and packet of materials that were mailed out previously. Are there any changes, corrections to those minutes? All right, if not, those minutes will stand approved then as presented. Next item on the agenda, under Old Business, application Z08069 by Mr. Masood John Baluch for Smitty's Auto Parts, requesting a special use permit in order to construct an automobile dismantler and recycler facility in a heavy industrial zone for property located along the west side of South Malloy Lane, west of New Salem Highway. Mr. Blomley, if you'd review that application for us, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman Rogers, and good afternoon, Chairman Rogers and members of the board. Our first item, as you mentioned, is for a special use permit for an automobile dismantler recycler. This same request was before the board back in August of 2008. We held a public hearing at that meeting. So today, because we've already held the public hearing and nothing substantially changed with the application, no public hearing will be required today. We're bringing it up under Old Business. If you'll recall, at that meeting on August 27, 2008, the board deferred action because the applicant was not meeting one of the required additional standards in the zoning ordinance, and that standard being that the application shall be accompanied by a sworn affidavit by the applicant that all permits and approvals required by any local, state, or federal environmental laws or regulations, including but not limited to water and air pollution laws and regulations, have been secured, and that such use shall be operated in accordance with any such local, state, or federal environmental laws or regulations. At the time, you'll recall Mr. Baluch had turned in a sworn affidavit, but it simply stated that he would comply with all the regulations. And what this requirement states is that he has to have gone through the appropriate channels to secure those permits prior to making application before the Board of Zoning Appeals. Since that time, he has submitted this sworn affidavit and has obviously sworn in the affidavit, without sounding too redundant. I apologize for that. That he has secured those permits from the state. And in my research, there are no federal permits for this. That the state permits that are issued by TDEC essentially encapsulate all of the environmental permits for a use of this type. Now I'll just go over a little bit of the basics of the operation before I go over with you some changes to the site plan. But the basics of the operation are that it's a facility in which vehicles are purchased at auction, brought to the facility, and that parts that are reusable or able to be sold again are stripped from the vehicle. And Mr. Baluch, who has a similar facility in Davidson County, keeps a computerized inventory of all of the parts that he has there, and has the part of the building is actually a warehouse to keep those parts. Mr. Baluch just has told staff that the majority of the business that he does is shipping out of the facility, and is not walk-up customers, but it's done via the internet. Folks can order online, and they will ship the part that is ordered to wherever around the world that particular customer is. Now, with that being said, there is some amount of walk-up traffic that is associated with this business. Now, walk-up in the fact that people would drive there, park there, ask the business operator if he had that particular part in stock, and they would look through their catalog. Not the type of facility where people would be allowed to roam freely throughout the storage yard. The majority of the lot would consist of the storage yard, in which vehicles would be stored on site. There would not be any crushing equipment kept there on site permanently, the applicant would bring in a automobile crusher once or twice a year, and that crusher would crush the vehicles, and the vehicles that have no value to the applicant anymore would be hauled off at that time. So about once or twice a year, they would go through the lot and remove any vehicles that are not useful to them anymore. I'll show you a snapshot of the property. It's this L-shaped property here. The property that is in the kind of the cradle of that L is owned by Mr. Robert Corlew and has a large tower on it. Subject property is zoned heavy industrial, and this type of use is permitted by special use permit in the heavy industrial zoning district. Directly to the south is zoned RMO, which is residential mobile home park, and there's not a mobile home park developed on the property. There's a single family dwelling. The property to the north and to the west are also zoned heavy industrial and are undeveloped at this time. Across the street is predominantly undeveloped and zoned heavy industrial. There is one single family home across the street and to the south, and there are some mobile homes further to the south on Malloy Lane. This is looking at the property from Malloy Lane. See, there's some brush along the front property line that would be removed with the development of the site, and a new planting yard would be installed. This is looking back into the property, looking towards the rear property line where there's also an existing tree line. You can see the antenna tower in the back. This is looking at the southern property line where there's an existing tree line. That tree line would have to be supplemented with additional materials because the property to the south is zoned RMO, and a Type D buffer is required along that southern property line. Shot looking south on Malloy Lane, the front of the property. This is a shot of the single-family residence that's to the south of the subject property. This is the single-family residence that's down the street and across the street from the subject property. It's looking directly across the street, and you can see the jail in the background. And last but not least, this is looking up Malloy Lane, looking back north towards Bridge Avenue from the subject property. There have been a couple of minor changes to the site plan that I wanted to go over with you. A couple of changes from when this was before the board back in August. The applicant, after doing some research, determined that a 7-foot wooden privacy fence was not a standard size for wooden privacy fences. So you'll recall along the south lot line, the west lot line, and the northern property line, he was proposing a 7-foot wooden privacy fence to go along with the 7-foot masonry block wall that would be along the front parking lot and adjacent to the Corlew property. Because that 7-foot was not a standard size, he has actually increased that to 8 feet because that's more of a standard size for 6 or 8 feet is normally more of a standard size for privacy fencing, and he's decided to go up. The other change is that previously he was showing landscape islands inside of the storage lot, and that he asked whether or not that was actually required because it would make the functionality of the storage lot it would lessen the functionality of the storage lot having the landscape islands in there. And we determined that that's not a parking lot per se that would require landscape islands. But Mr. Baluch has, in taking those landscape islands out, he has added additional evergreen plantings along the masonry block wall along the property line. You'll recall back in August at the public hearing, we did have one person speak, and that was Mr. Joe Swanson, Jr., and included with your materials are the minutes from the August meeting, as well as an email, I believe, he sent to all of you in November expressing his concerns regarding the application and a rough concept plan that he's had drawn up for the property that he owns around the subject property. As he's mentioned in his email, what he submitted to you is purely conceptual in nature, and is just to demonstrate to you his intentions for what he wants to do on that property. But I did want to point out to you that that's been included in your agenda packages. The city traffic and engineering staffs do have concerns regarding the substandard condition of Malloy Lane and the added traffic that the proposed use will bring. Staff stresses that any approval be subject to the recommended condition number 4 listed below, so that the necessary road improvements will be in place for traffic to function properly to and from this site. And I've recommended 4 conditions, and I'll just read over those to you right now if you decide to approve the application. The Planning Commission must grant site plan approval for the proposed development. As a function of its site plan review, the Planning Commission will also have final architectural review of the development, and all building orientation requirements must be met to the satisfaction of the Planning Commission. 2, the final grading and drainage plan will be subject to the review and approval of the city engineer. The site design must include adequate room for stormwater management and must comply with the stormwater quality ordinance. You'll notice that on the site plan, the majority of this lot, all but with a little portion, little corner of the lot, are in the 100-year floodplain. And in talking with our engineering department, there will likely be an area required on site for detention. So any grading and drainage plan we would like to make subject to the approval of the city engineering staff, as stated in this comment. 3, the landscape plan, including the required buffer, will be subject to the final review and approval of the city horticulturist. The applicant is requesting a good deal of credit for the existing trees that are on the subject property, and we would like to have Ms. Holloway work with the applicant to ensure that the existing trees that he is seeking are in good shape and will survive and are able to receive credit for the required landscaping. And finally, the comment that I alluded to earlier, Malloy Lane is a substandard street. The developer will be required to construct improvements to Malloy Lane, including possible off-site improvements, and or submit payment in lieu of construction for these improvements as to be determined by the city engineer. The final construction plans must also demonstrate that the types of vehicles that will be accessing the proposed use will be able to adequately navigate Malloy Lane and the site itself. As you see, Malloy Lane is a substandard street, and we want to make sure that if this use is allowed, that the proper street improvements are put in place to facilitate access to and from the site. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Mr. Baluch is in the audience if you have any questions for him as well. And, of course, as I mentioned before, no public hearing is required on this item because one has already been held.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any questions for Mr. Blomley?
Chairman Rogers, I have one. Not knowing exactly what the city engineer would come up with as a plan of what improvements that would need to be made to Malloy Lane, as our ride around, there's no question, as you mentioned, this is a substandard street. Is it such that there's enough easement that road can be improved enough to handle the type of vehicles that would have to come in and out of here, or is this owner going to have to look at maybe even purchasing property from other property owners in order to improve this street well enough that it could handle the types of vehicles that would be coming in and out of here?
Well, we haven't investigated that thoroughly into the situation. Mr. Sam Huddleston, with our engineering staff, has reviewed the plans and has discussed it with Mr. Baluch. One of the things that has been communicated to him is that it's a very important aspect of his plan to be able to have the proper access, and that Malloy Lane be improved, specifically where it does that 90-degree turn from West Malloy Lane to South Malloy Lane. But one of the things that Mr. Baluch conveyed to me is that whereas you might think that a lot of the traffic coming to and from this site would be car carriers, for example, or larger vehicles, he said that really standard wrecker trucks are basically what the vehicles that will come in and out of this site. I know you have some photographs of the facility that he has, that he provided, the facility that he has in Davidson County. The way that Mr. Baluch described to me is that once or twice a day, or how many times a day will you get a car from an auction, Mr. Baluch?
Twice a week in auction, every time, 10 cars.
Okay.
About 20 cars a week.
Okay, he said that about 20 cars per week would come from auction, and that those would be typically on a typical wrecker truck as opposed to a larger semi. The times that he would have the larger vehicles would be when the cars are being disposed of and being removed from the site en masse. Would that be a fair statement, Mr. Baluch? Okay. And that will be about once to twice per year.
Matthew, we talked about this a little bit earlier. The property does not abut the Greenway easement.
That's correct. It does not border the river property. There is actually Mr. Swanson owns a piece of property to the west of the subject property, and then the interstate is west of Mr. Swanson's property, and the river actually crosses the interstate further to the north of this property.
Okay, so this property is not going to be really anywhere close to any Greenway trail.
The Greenway would be a ways further to the north along Malloy Lane, closer towards Bridge Avenue.
On the plan, the block wall, the concrete block wall is on the, I guess, the north side and the east side of the property, which essentially abuts the Corlew property.
It would be abutting the Corlew property, as well as at the front entrance of the site, what would be viewed from Malloy Lane as you drive by the front of the facility.
Okay. And that's a 7-foot block wall, right?
That's correct.
But the fence now is going to be an 8-foot fence.
Yes.
Any concern on your part about increasing the block wall just to be consistent with the wood fence, to raise it up to 8 feet?
I think that would be something that would be within the board's power. One of the standards in our zoning ordinance is that adequate screening has to be provided on all sides so that none of the vehicles are visible. Mr. Baluch has told me that none of the vehicles in his lot will be stacked. They'll all be single level. They won't be stacked on top of each other. So certainly, going another foot would go that much further towards concealing what's in there.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any other questions for Mr. Blomley? All right. Any questions for Mr. Baluch? Or Mr. Baluch, you want to add anything to the application? We're not going to conduct a public hearing today, but just curious, do you have any comments that you want to add to Mr. Blomley's review?
Explained everything very good.
Okay. I think you may have some questions, though,
I
from
got
the
some
board.
questions for you, Mr. Belushi.
If you could come forward, please, sir.
Yes.
You've got these, Mr. Belushi, you've got, your site plan shows these parking spaces here, or what surface are we looking at here? Are we looking at gravel or dirt or pavement, or what are we looking at?
Inside.
Where are you going to store
chips
it?
and tars and chips.
Tars and chips?
Tar and chip.
Okay. And are you going to, are you saying that you're going to mark those spaces off and you're going to designate one vehicle per one parking space? Is that how it's going to look inside?
Yes.
How many vehicles, you said you get about 20 a week and you crush twice a year, or at least that's what Matthew had told us.
About 80 cars a month.
About 80 cars a month.
Yeah. Sometimes
How many you plan on what's the most you'd have on your site at one time before the crusher comes?
it's capable of holding about 500 cars, 600 cars inside. But we usually crush every time about 250 or so.
Okay.
That when they come, we get 250 ready. 200 to 250.
So you'd be crushing 4 times a year or something?
But 2-3 times, no more than 3 times. 3. It's at the beginning probably we don't bring as many cars as in. And we probably bring maybe 5-6 cars a week. And right now where we are operating, we bring about 10 cars there every week. But I'm talking about 20 cars a week. We're bringing right now in Nashville. But this plan here, we're trying to start very slow. Is in the future.
Well, yeah,
we might
but yeah,
bring it
I
up.
guess I'm asking, in your normal operation, how many do you usually, you told me you had about 250 cars
yes.
before you call a crusher in?
Usually it has to be over 200 before they come. They ask you if they have more than 200, they come. So we have sometime between 250 we call.
Can they do 200 in a day, or how long does it take them to crush
It would take them about 3 days. 2 to 3 days.
And they bring a machine in that does it
Yeah.
on site, right?
Yes.
And then do they also remove those once they're crushed?
Yes, they remove them. They have
Is that a
18
continuous process, or they crush them all and then remove them all?
They do everything. They crush them, get the gas tanks, they haul everything off, clean everything up.
I guess I'm wondering, is that going on continuously over this 3-day process? Or
Yes, continuously.
Okay. So they'll crush a few, take them off, and continue
Right.
crushing.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a back and forth of
Yes.
removing those.
They usually bring 2 18-wheelers. Each 18-wheeler takes 20 to 25 cars, crushed cars.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about, I know a little bit, but if you would, help us out on when you bring a vehicle in, they're going to be sitting there and then they're going to get crushed. Fluids, antifreeze, different things like that. Tell us,
Okay, the
if you
cars that
would,
come
about
over
how that
there-
works.
First, we take the engine and transmission out. We store those on the ships, so they don't have an engine transmission to be crushed to bring oil out.
What about the fluids? Do you drain those
The
fluids?
fluid, they stay in the engine. When we sell the engine, they go with the engine. But if we purchase a car from outside that has a bad engine, we drain the oil before we crush it. Because otherwise, the crusher will break the engine and all the oil will go out.
So you're
So-
storing this engine in this 9,000 square foot warehouse or whatever?
It's going to be, yeah. in the
Okay.
store.
And it's going to be, what, concrete floor in there?
It's going to be concrete floor, yes.
Okay,
It's just like regular warehouse.
all right. What about the other fluids?
There's going to be transmission fluid and engine fluid that will be drained on the cars that we're going to crush with the engine. Otherwise, they just come off and stay on the shelf till they're being stored.
But do you drain them when they come in and store them somewhere, or are you saying
Yeah.
they sit on the lot with the fluid
Yeah.
in them?
The cars, as long as the engine is in the car, they stay in the car. But when it's time to crush the car, we take the engine out and put them on the shelf. If some cars, most
So you don't
cars,
take the fluids out until you get ready to take the engine out? Is that what you're telling me?
right, until we're ready to
So
get
it's sitting on your lot full of antifreeze and oil or whatever, transmission
Yes.
fluid, all that's in there?
Yes, we could take the engine and transmission out as they come in. But as long as we have room inside the storage, we take the engine transmission out, put them inside the storage. But when we don't run out of room, we usually keep them inside the car until it's time to crush the car. Then we take the engine transmission out and crush the cars.
As part of the licensing, EPA, you have to send in a sample of, tell us
Yeah.
about that, tell us what you have to do on the
We have to
groundwater
once you
stuff.
take sample of water and send it for them to check it.
Of groundwater,
Yeah, rain water,
runoff.
the runoff of water. Yes.
And how often do you have to do that again?
It's, once a year we have to send a sample in, but we're supposed to take a sample every time, 3-4 times a year, and keep it on site.
In case they come and want to
Yeah,
see
they
it?
come and we can show them with the date and the time that it rained.
Do you have to have a plan or something on file with them about taking care of these fluids and what you do
Yes.
and all that?
Yes,
Have
we
you
have
already
to have
sub-
stormwater plan.
Yeah. Have you submitted that to the EPA already?
Yes.
And do they approve that annually, or is that just the plan until they come and tell you
No,
something
they-
different? Or
They don't approve it annually. Usually it's every 4 or 5 years. Then you have to apply again. But annually you have to pay a fee to them.
And it's actually TDEC that he has to go through.
But EPA has to approve his groundwater, his disposal plan, and TDEC requires them to do that. Isn't that right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I think the federal regulations are kind of funneled through TDEC and administered by TDEC.
Right. They're the one that gives the license, but he still has to jump through some EPA hoops. I'm just wondering how his plan is in place for that. So this plan of leaving the vehicles on the lot with the fluid in there, that's something that you've indicated to EPA, that's how you're going to manage those, and you're telling me they're okay with that they approve that as proper procedure?
They will approve that, yes.
That's all my questions.
I was going to ask, during the couple times a year when you have the crusher coming in, what are the noise, I guess, disruptions or whatever during that portion? And does that go on 24 hours for 3 days, or is that during
Not 24
normal
hours.
business
No. They usually come 8 in the morning until 5 in the evening, then we close, they leave.
Okay.
But there is not much noise going with this operation. They just crush cars, don't make much noise. It's just like an engine. The crusher engine is on, it's crushing cars. Just the only noise you hear is the engine that's working the motor. And the rest of it is no noise. They park the 18-wheeler, once it's filled up, they start it and go. There's drivers driving, and some people crush, and there's about 5-6 people come to crush.
I notice on the plans here, the actual building, I guess the office space is a one-story. Is that behind a fence, the part of the privacy fence, or is that?
I think you'll have the front of the building will be visible. He'll have the warehouse sides of the building will be screened, but the front of the building will be visible. It will have a certain amount of a public component to it, being available for people to drive up and for customers to walk in. So it will have a storefront per se.
Okay.
Chairman Rogers, I have just hesitation if this is the right place for this type of business. As it stands today, a lot of this acreage is vacant. I think with the comments that the Swansons have made, that their plans are to develop the property around it, and knowing their past history, that development would be a nice development. And in looking at the rules of issuing a special use permit, one of the paragraphs that's on our list here is that the proposed building or use that would be constructed, arranged, or operated as to be compatible with the immediate vicinity, and so as not to interfere with the development and use of adjacent property in accordance with the applicable district regulations. My statement would be that I think this would negatively affect the development of the adjacent property, and because of that, I would not be in favor of granting this special use permit. And I don't know the feelings of the other members of the board, but that would be my opinion.
Matthew, with one of the concerns is that property is affected by the 100-year flood and may have difficulty receiving city services such as EMS, fire, police, solid waste disposal. Do you see any concern with that?
As far as the flood or the roadway condition?
I think it's the 100-year flood, being in a floodplain.
I think that north of here along Malloy Lane, of course Malloy comes out on Bridge and it comes out on New Salem Highway. I think that north of here where the flooding is more prevalent, I do believe there are some there's more of an issue north on Malloy Lane with flooding. As far as vehicles being able to get to and from the site, there is another access from New Salem Highway, and I would think that would be the main way that vehicles, whether they're his customers or whether or not they're service providers, would access the site.
Does Malloy Lane flood out coming from Bridge? Is that what you're saying?
I think that I can't answer that for certain. All I can say with certainty is that there is that the closer you get to the river on Malloy Lane, the further north, in other words, is the more prevalent the floodplain is.
Mr. Ives, if the chairman doesn't have him, if I might, is it possible if the board approved this permit to, and it may not be necessary, I'm just interested on your thoughts, condition it on the operator's continued continue to remain in good standing with the state as far as his licensure and following all the EPA rules that the state required him to do. In other words, if he fell out of favor with the state in his licensure, he would have a permit to operate it, but he wouldn't be licensed by the state. Is there any condition that we could impose that would, as a condition of our permit, require him to continue to be in good standing with those folks?
Well, pardon me, I believe that since a condition to him receiving this special use permit is that he have the appropriate state permits and state licensures, then to condition this that those state and federal, if there are any permits, licensures, remain in place would be appropriate. It seems that it might actually be implied that that's
I guess that was my question. Is it implied, or is it something that if we were inclined to approve it, that we would want to explicitly say?
Mr. Dodd, it seems to me that it is implied, and I think it would be fully appropriate to make it explicit as a stated
Just to make
condition.
sure there's no. Okay.
Has this been to the Planning Commission yet?
No.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, what the course would be here is all that he's submitted right now is a conceptual site plan. If the special use permit, which would be the zoning entitlement for the property, were granted, his next step would be to engage his civil engineer and doing a more comprehensive set of civil plans, including grading and drainage and the road improvements after consultation with our engineering department.
Would it include like front elevations and that sort of thing of the actual building that's going to be on the property?
Yes, that would be required in moving on to the Planning Commission level.
around today, I noticed that it's some residential area near that facility that's coming in there, and it's just kind of concerning to me with people living there in the trailers and things, what effect it would have on them.
Thank you, Mr. Bluch. We're going to let you sit down. Ask for any more comments on this particular application. We're not going to conduct a public hearing today, having done so back when we considered this, was in November?
August.
Excuse me, in August.
Yeah.
If there's no further comments, I'll make a motion. I will make a motion to deny this special use permit.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on this particular motion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No. No.
So it sounds like, take a roll call, but I think it was 3-2-3 in favor of the motion to deny and 2 opposed.
If we could,
Do roll call? You want to do roll call?
Please.
Okay.
John Rogers,
No.
Kenny Halliburton,
To deny, yes.
Adam Dodd,
No.
Francis Mosby,
Yes.
Davis Young.
Yes.
All right. All right, Mr. Bluch, that application has been denied, sir. Appreciate you coming in today. Okay, next item on the agenda is application Z09001 by Ms. Kathy Moore Nobles, requesting a 10-foot variance from the minimum required 30-foot front setback for principal structures and a 9-foot variance from the minimum required 20-foot side setback for principal structures in a residential multifamily RM16 zone for property located at 724 and 728 Greenland Drive. Mr. Blum, if you'd review that application, please.
sure thing, Chairman Rogers, if you bear with me just a moment. Thank you once again, Chairman Rogers. The subject property, as you mentioned, is 724 and 728 Greenland Drive. The property is presently zoned RM16. There are presently 2 triplexes, one on each of the 2 properties. The applicant seeks to combine the 2 lots into one lot of record for the development of a small apartment complex. There will be a total of 25 units in the apartment development on 1.58 acres, which is within the maximum allowable density in the RM16 zoning district for that size. The applicant would, in building the proposed development, the applicant has come to the board with a design that requires several variances, and I will go over those variances with you in just a moment. First, we'll take a look at the overhead of the property. You'll see Given Court is a small cul-de-sac street that runs along the south side of Greenland Drive, directly across the street from Evergreen Cemetery. As I mentioned, there are 2 existing structures on or there are multiple structures, but a total of 6 units on the existing, within the existing structures on the property. Along Given Court and Greenland Drive are predominantly multifamily and single-family uses. There are, for example, there's a duplex on the opposite corner of Greenland and Given, and several single-family in the direct vicinity as well. The applicant's proposed development is divided into 2 phases, and the name of the development is Given Place. It's divided into 2 phases. There will be Phase 1, which will be the rear half of the lots once they're combined. And Phase 1 will consist of 11 one-bedroom apartment units that will run parallel with the east side property line. You can see the parking for Phase 1 is in front of Phase 1. The main drive comes in off of Given Court. Phase 2 would consist of 2 or an L-shaped building. Each would contain 7 two-bedroom units for a total of 14 units in Phase 2. And the parking for Phase 2 would be concealed within that L-shaped, behind that L-shaped building. A number of variances are required, side setback variances and front setback variances. We'll look at Phase 1 first here in the back. You can see that where this property has a kind of an odd shape along the back portion of the property, a 20-foot side setback is required for this apartment building, and the applicant is proposed to be 11 feet off of this side lot line, requiring a 9-foot side setback variance. And here, along this 20-foot side setback, this corner of the building is encroaching and is 15.1 feet from the side property line instead of 20 feet, so a 5-foot variance is required right there. For the Phase 2 building, this side of the L shape is in compliance, but the front building along Greenland Drive, you can see it has a little bit of the front facade fluctuates a little bit. It's not flat. But there are portions of it that protrude out into that 30-foot front setback, and at its very closest, it's 20.6 feet from the front property line. A 10-foot front setback variance is required. And in addition, 11.3 feet from the east side property line for a 9-foot side setback variance. As I mentioned, Phase 1 will be constructed prior to Phase 2. While Phase 1 is being constructed and prior to Phase 2 being constructed, the 2 existing residential structures on both lots would remain. I do have architectural elevations for you, and those are also in front of you at your table. This is the architectural elevation for the Phase 1 building. As I mentioned, these will all be 1-story, 1-bedroom units. The Phase 2 building, they'll appear more as townhomes. They'll be 2 stories, and that will be that north elevation right there along the bottom is what will be visible along Greenland Drive. In Ms. Moore Noble's letter, she points to 2 main reasons for her request. First, she wants the Phase 2 building to frame the street corner while keeping the paved parking lot to the rear of the building hidden from the view of the public street. She believes this will achieve the more urban feel that she is trying to achieve. Also, she points to the oblong shape of the lot, making it difficult to develop with the allowable number of units that the zoning permits. In particular, the back portion of the property where the Phase 1 building is proposed to be located is virtually unusable once the setbacks are applied due to its narrowness. In addition to the architectural elevations, you also have the landscape plan, which present to you what type of landscaping they're proposing and what type of presentation they will be giving to the street. The applicant's plans have been revised according to staff's comments, and if the board approves these variance requests, staff recommends the following conditions. Number 1, a surveyor will be required to help lay out the footing of the buildings, and a surveyor certification must be provided that the buildings are in compliance with the action of the BZA as well as all other setback requirements. Number 2, the Planning Commission must grant site plan approval for the proposed development As a function of its site plan review, the Planning Commission will also have final architectural review of the development, and all building orientation requirements must be met to the satisfaction of the Planning Commission. And 3, a re-subdivision plat combining both lots into one lot of record must be recorded prior to the issuance of any building permits. One thing I will mention is that the front and side setback requests, variance requests, will need to be taken in separate motions by the board. Ms. Moore Nobles was unable to be with us today, but Mr. Bill Huddleston, her design engineer, is here to represent her if you have any questions regarding the application for the applicant. And, of course, before or after the public hearing, I'll be happy to answer any questions as well.
All right, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any questions for Mr. Blomley? Mr. Blomley, there are 4 variances that are necessary on the site plan. I missed. Have we only advertised for 2?
Yes, what we've advertised for was the greatest distance. For example, the 9-foot side setback variance would in fact cover the other side setback variances because they're less than the 9 feet, and that would approving a 9-foot side setback variance specific to the plan that was presented to the board will be sufficient to grant all of those, unless you wanted to take those each in separate motions.
Yeah, that's what I was sitting here thinking, is that looking at them, they all are fairly unique, so we may want to take 4 separate motions instead of 2. That's all right.
We can never have a problem by having too much detail and too much clarity of what we have done, so separate motions would be fine.
All right, thank you. All right. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Mr. Huddleston, anything you'd like to add to the application?
Good afternoon, Chairman Rogers and members of the board. I'm Bill Huddleston with Huddleston Steel Engineering. I'm pleased to be able to present this proposal to you today for these variances. Ms. Nobles apologizes that she can't be here today. She had a son with an unexpected medical issue that she's taking care of. As Mr. Blomley said, we've got some unusually shaped parcels that we're having to deal with for this project. And also, those parcels actually have some slope on them, which we're not always blessed with here in Murfreesboro. But in order to get the yield required to make this project feasible, we are proposing 25 units. Now, this plan before you is a plan that has been subject to numerous revisions. We've been in contact with planning staff from the beginning, and there were 2 goals that Matthew touched on that I'd like to reiterate that are causing this layout and therefore these variances. Number 1, we wanted to create a very pedestrian-friendly apartment complex here. This is in the vicinity of MTSU. We've got a newly widened Greenland Drive out there with new sidewalks, and we anticipate not only the vehicular traffic that's there, but also increasing pedestrian traffic in this area. And so this layout incorporates that pedestrian-friendly feel that we're trying to achieve out there. Also, we wanted to hide the parking from Greenland Drive, and that's the result. That's why we have this L-shaped building that fronts Greenland Drive and Given Court. By providing that L-shaped building, we're able to hide the parking for this ultimate development. And in so doing, that's the reason for these variances that we need for this project. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Huddleston. Any questions for Mr. Huddleston? All right, you got off easy today. Thank you. At this time, then, we'll go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you would, please come forward to the podium, state your name and your address, and any comments that you might have.
Good afternoon. I'm Jonathan Lucas at 4722 Scottish Drive. And my reasons against the variances are that we set these easements to protect the value of our properties, to keep the clean, consistent look of the neighborhoods. And if we keep encroaching on our streets, we clutter them up. As far as their arguments that the lot size makes it unusable places, green space is never unusable. It's not wasted property. And I look at it, just because I can fit 5 adults in a Cavalier doesn't mean I should squeeze them all in and drive to Florida. That's simply mine. If you guys have any questions on my thoughts, I'd answer them.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lucas. Any questions for Mr. Lucas?
Mr. Lucas, where is your property in relationship to this property?
Excuse me?
Where is your property in relationship?
We're on the other side of 24, actually quite a ways from it, but I value my city, Murfreesboro. We're off of Old Fort Parkway and Rucker is the area that where our property is.
Okay.
So I have no direct, as a neighbors looking across seeing it, but I do like to see the neighborhood the community continue to keep a clean look, which makes people want to live in Murfreesboro and not become like other communities to the northwest of us that when I moved to the area, people recommended me to stay away from because of the lack of planning. So I'm looking for the long-term value in the Murfreesboro name.
Sure.
All right. Thank you, sir. Anyone else wishing to speak for or against this application? Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for any further comments or motions.
Mr. Blomley, is there a required, I see the landscape plan, but is there a type of buffer that's required between this property and the property to the east, or since are they zoned the same, so there's no required buffer? Is that right?
That's correct. It's light zoning, so all that would be required would be the regular perimeter planting yard.
What about any, I guess, lighting from this parking lot spilling over onto that property, or any other issues would be dealt with at planning? Is that condition of being a site plan approval have anything? Will they review those issues? Have you thought about those?
A lighting plan is not required. The use is something that is permitted by right. What we're considering today is purely just the variance aspect of the plan. The overall site design is something that the Planning Commission will review, but a photometric plan showing lighting levels is not typically required in a situation like this.
The variance is going to require that parking lot to go pretty far close to that property line, and I was just curious if at what point, if any, that was considered.
I think that would the location of the parking lot in all the while this is the design of the parking lot, and its proposed location is that distance from the neighboring property. It could actually be designed a little bit closer to the neighboring property, so it's allowed to be. The parking lot is not encroaching into any of the planting yards, so it's actually at a location where it would be permitted by right. And I think what the and Mr. Huddleston, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So the property, but there's a residential home or something on this property to the east, isn't there?
I believe it was
it's zoned multifamily, but
you're talking about what's labeled as FJB Limited Partnership.
right.
I believe it was a multifamily building. I believe it was an apartment building, if I'm not mistaken. And just to comment on what Mr. Huddleston said before, this was something that Mr. Huddleston and Ms. Nobles did meet quite extensively with Mr. Adelot on, and the variances that are requested are something that the applicants have worked with staff on. What the applicant is trying to achieve is a good presentation towards Greenland Drive, trying to keep the parking behind the structures, trying to have some type of architectural control over the buildings, so that the way those buildings present themselves and the way the development presents itself to the street is very pleasing to passersby. I think it's something. The present design that we have is something that has been chiseled out by staff and by the applicant and her design team over a good period of time to try to make it as aesthetically pleasing as possible.
That kind of addresses my question, which is, I know Mr. Huddleston talked about there being a lot of different iterations of this particular plan. Was there an iteration that allowed for no variance requests, or fewer variance requests that was tolerable? Or
There was, but it made for a much more rigid type of design that didn't present well towards the street. So this is what we ended up with after a few iterations. And to address Mr. Dodd's concerns, I think they're both valid concerns. The landscaping plan does show, while it's not a type C or D buffer, we are showing more than the minimum along those single-family uses, even though they're zoned for multifamily. We're showing a significant landscaping plan. That's that bottom plan there on the board. Also, the lighting, I think, is a good issue to bring up, and I don't see a problem with orienting our parking lot lights away from those single-family houses towards our parking lot, and we can show that when we go through site plan approval.
Yeah, it seemed all close. I just didn't know at what point that may not be any of our
That's all right. We'll be
concern,
happy
so to speak, but I just had a question about that spillover.
Thank
That, Mr. Dodd, that concern is definitely something that I will pass along to Mr. Adelot and Ms. Logan, who, if this goes forward, would be responsible for its review at the Planning Commission level. And I know that Mr. Halliburton's taking mental note of the concerns as well.
All right, what other questions or comments do we have, or is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'll go on and make a motion for the first one, that we approve it. The 10-foot variance from the minimum required 30-foot front setback for the principal structures.
I'll second that motion.
Is that subject to staff comments?
Yes, subject to staff comments, exactly.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on that motion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the 10-foot variance of the minimum required 30-foot front setback portion of that application has been granted. We'll now move on to the 9-foot variance from the minimum required 20-foot side setback for the principal structure.
I was just going to say, if we're going to take those three requests in three separate
Which
motions.
9-foot is this one?
I'm sorry?
Is that what you're saying? Which 9-foot variance is this one?
Yeah, I think we could clarify by saying, just going right down the line and saying 9-foot side setback requirement, or side setback variance for the Phase 2 building.
Right. I agree. All right, we'll take that one next.
Is it illegal to say so moved?
Yes. I'm ready for so moved.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. And again,
Subject to staff comments.
That's what I was going to say. Again, all these are subject to staff comments. All right, any further discussion?
We're on the southeast of we're in the back of the property now. Is that where
We are on the northeast side of the
Oh, I'm with you. Yeah.
The Greenland Drive, the building that fronts Greenland Drive,
yes, sir.
Okay.
9-foot variance is required.
Closest to
there.
Green. Okay.
Yes.
I got you. Thanks.
All right, if there's no other comments or questions, then all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that portion of the application has been granted. Then we'll move on to the 9-foot variance for the required 20-foot minimum side setback for Phase 1 building. Do I have a motion on that?
So moved.
All right.
Subject to staff comments.
Yes, subject to staff comments.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that portion has been granted. And then last, we'll move to the 5-foot variance of the minimum 20-foot side setback for Phase 1 building. Have a motion on that?
I'll make a motion we approve, subject to staff comments.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Mr. Huddleston, all 4 of those variances have been approved. Then. Appreciate you coming in. Thank you. Good to see you. Next item on the agenda is application Z09002 by Mr. Kevin Gunther of Design Resource and Huddleston Steel Engineering for Mays & Company, requesting a 7-foot variance from the minimum required 7-foot separation between buildings and parking in the Gateway Design Overlay District for property located at the southwest corner of North Thompson Lane and Robert Rose Drive. And I think Mr. Blumley is getting set up to review that application for us, and I will now turn it over to Mr. Blumley.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. Subject property is at the southwest corner of North Thompson Lane and Robert Rose Drive. It is directly across the street across Robert Rose Drive from the Aldi and the shopping center that's in front of the Aldi. And I'll show you on the overhead right now. Here is the subject property right now. It's currently split-zoned light industrial and commercial highway, and it's also in the Gateway Design Overlay District number 2. There's a strip center across Robert Rose and the Aldi. Here is the Hampton Inn and the future home of Burger King right here. And across the street there are some self-storage units and a gas station, and of course the Regions Bank is catty corner from the subject property. The applicant has been through initial design review at the Planning Commission level and has received initial design review approval. The Planning Commission passed this request on to the Board of Zoning Appeals with no opposition to this request. This is like many that we have seen come before us since we adopted the Gateway Design Overlay District, is that there is a minimum separation on property that is less than 1 acre of 7 feet between the buildings and the parking lot. And for purposes of applying this requirement, we consider any part of the parking lot, whether or not it's a driveway aisle, actual parking spaces, any part of the parking lot to be parking lot for the purposes of applying that separation standard. As you know, there are certain uses that don't lend themselves very well to applying this standard. And some of the ones that we have seen in the past that have had to come before the board for variances have been banks with drive-through aisle or with drive-up tellers. We've seen Burger King several months ago that had a drive-through in which it was just not practical for that type of use to comply with that minimum distance requirement. And that is what the applicant is seeking today, is a variance from that requirement. The applicant will meet that requirement on all other sides of the building, and he has attempted to address the lack of separation from the building to the parking lot on the side of the building. Or I guess I should say that this is a proposed Firestone retail store, a tire store, which is a permitted use in this zoning district. And there will be some bay doors along the south side of the building, and obviously to enter into those bay doors there has to be you have to be able to drive into them, forcing them to apply for this variance. I'll show you the landscape plan right here. Here's the building itself. See, on the south side of the building is the area in which they intend, in which they're asking for a variance from that provision. As I mentioned, the east and west and north sides of the building all comply with the requirement. And what they've done to try to mitigate the impact of having of not being able to meet that requirement on the south side is add additional landscaping on the south side of the site in order to help screen the area that will not have that separation. For example, here in this landscape island, it will be a continuous row of plantings, trees and shrubs to help break up the view shed for those cars coming north on or driving north on Thompson Lane. In addition, the applicant is exceeding the landscaping requirements along the southern property line and along the front property line as well, if I'm not mistaken. So the applicant has requested a variance from that provision. And one last thing that I'll show you is the elevation of the building. This is the south elevation with the bay doors. That's what the building will look like on the side where the variance is being requested. This would be the north elevation facing Robert Rose, and of course this would be the front of the store facing Thompson Lane and the rear of the store facing westward. The board does need to conduct a public hearing on this item, and staff recommends that if the board approves this request, that it be subject to the following condition. The Planning Commission must grant site plan approval and final design review approval for the proposed development. Mr. Kevin Gunther, representing the development team, is here if you have any questions for him.
All right, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any questions for Mr. Blomley? All right, Mr. Gunther, anything you'd like to add to this application, sir?
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Board. Kevin Gunther with Design Resource, working with Huddleston Steel. I think Mr. Blomley covered the issues well. We've worked very closely with staff. I think there's three things we've really tried to do to make this very compatible, this variance request compatible with what's going on around it. Orientation of the building. Those bay doors are oriented away from any main public roads. Also, we've added distance to the buffer yards from what's required. Architectural detailing that was shown you, and also additional landscape. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gunther. Any questions for Mr. Gunther? All right, if not, then at this time we'll go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you would, please come forward to the podium. And seeing none, we'll go ahead and declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for any further comments, questions, or motion.
I would just like to make the comment that when this came before the Planning Commission, the idea of the planting yard in the middle, and then them having the ability, if all their bay areas had vehicles in them, and being able to park any excess vehicles in this area by having it landscaped, in essence, buffered twice. You got a perimeter yard and then an interior landscaping perimeter. Was very attractive and still feel that way. And with that, I would approve this variance request subject to all staff comments.
A second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Mr. Gunther, that application has been granted.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate you coming in today. All right, next item on the agenda, application Z09003 by Ms. Beth Smith for Rutherford County Habitat for Humanity, requesting an 18-foot variance of the minimum required 30-foot front setback for principal structures located in a residential duplex zone for property located at 410 South University Street. And Mr. Blum, if you'd review that application, please.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. The subject property is located at 410 South University Street, zoned RD. This property is directly to the south of three properties that you considered for variances several months ago in the fall of 2008. This lot, unlike the previous three lots, is actually large enough to have a single-family structure built upon it without any setback variances. However, at the urging of staff, the applicant has made application for a front setback variance, and the concern of staff was that because of the small lots to the north, in which front setback variances and other variances were necessitated by the small lot size, staff did not want the applicant to build a structure in compliance with the setbacks that would look out of place and have a detrimental aesthetic impact on the neighborhood by being pushed back so much further from the other three lots. So the applicant did make application per staff's urging in order to make this house line up with the existing houses in harmony for a greater aesthetic appeal. Included with the agenda materials is a letter and a plot plan from the applicant, and I've got some photographs to show you as well. Here is the aerial photograph of the subject property. There's currently a single-family home on here right now, which the applicant intends to tear down. Here is the existing single-family home. These three structures, as you saw on the ride around this morning, have been demolished, and the applicant has pulled permits for the two northernmost structures, which would be 400 and 402 South University. And you'll recall 406 South University was the front setback was approved subject to the applicant being granted a driveway easement on 410 South University, which is the subject to today's application. And I did want to report back to the board today that the applicant has been diligently working with her attorney and with the city legal department to have a satisfactory access or driveway easement on 410 South University for the benefit of 406 South University. And of course, per the Board of Zoning Appeals conditions of approval at the previous meeting for 406 South University, no building permit will be issued until that driveway easement is recorded. And just briefly some pictures of the subject property and of the surrounding neighborhood. This is the subject property. This is the house that currently sits upon the subject property. As you can see, it is situated much closer to the front property line than the required 30-foot front setback. So this existing structure is legally nonconforming, predating our current zoning requirements. This shot is looking to the north. Of course, this is the subject house, and looking to the north, this is 402 South University, which was granted a variance this past fall, and it is currently under construction, as you saw this morning on the ride-around. And just to kind of illustrate to you why staff urged the applicant to apply for a front setback variance, is that this structure at the corner of Reed and Reed and University, just to the south of the subject property, was also another habitat house, which it was not granted a front setback variance along the university side. It was granted a variance along the Reed side, but not along the university side. And you see how far back it sits in relation to the other houses on that block, and that's something that we've become more and more wary of, or more and more cognizant of, when we see the redevelopment of the older areas, in which, as the Manny Avenue Comprehensive Plan stated, that the redevelopment of these older areas are the suburban zoning and setback requirements don't always mesh well with the existing development. This is looking south along South University Street. This is the existing, or the house that's under construction right now at 402 South University. And you can see the beginnings of what will be the house at 400 South University Street. This is a view from across the street looking north. You can see the proximity of the houses to the property line, front property line along South University. And finally, this is looking south along South University at the corner of Reed and University, looking down towards Patterson. Just kind of give you some perspective. This is plot plans of all 4 properties. These are the 3 houses that were proposed back in the fall that show the relationship of these houses to University Street. 402 is the one that's under construction, as is 400, and 406, which was the smallest of the 3 small lots, is the one that the driveway easement was required along the north lot line of 410. It is not currently under construction because that driveway easement has not been recorded. But as I mentioned, the applicant is diligently working to make that happen. 410 South University is the subject of this request, and as you can see, the applicant has made a request to be consistent with the other 3 houses that will be under construction just to the north. Staff has advertised the variance request as an 18-foot front setback variance request, which would mean it would be 12 feet off the front property line, which is the same as 2 of the 3 houses to the north. With that being said, however, the applicant wanted to provide a more gradual transition from the house that's on the corner of Reed and University to the 3 houses that are to the north of the subject property. So she would actually prefer the house to be granted, or this proposed house to be granted a 15-foot front setback variance as opposed to an 18-foot front setback variance. But what I recommended to her was that we can always scale back from what's advertised, so we can advertise greater and then get the board's feedback on what it feels is an appropriate setback for this house, whether or not the board would like it to be even with the houses to the north, or whether or not it would want the gradual transition from the house at the corner of Reed and University to the 3 houses that are to the north. With that being said, staff does believe that the subject lot is a good candidate for a front setback variance, which is why, of course, we have urged the applicant to make this request. The majority of the houses in the subject area are legally nonconforming or have been granted setback variances and do not meet the 30-foot front setback requirement. In addition, this request is generally consistent with the recommendations of the Manny Avenue Comprehensive Plan, which we use as a planning tool. The plan identifies the subject property as being in the Patterson Park Revitalization District. It is important to note that with regards to the Patterson Park Revitalization District, the plan stated that future redevelopment efforts in this area should focus on the provision of single-family owner-occupied housing as a catalyst for positive change in the neighborhood. Of course, the applicant is attempting to honor this particular goal of the plan. And the Patterson Park Revitalization District also recommended as a key design standard reduced front setbacks to better relate homes to the street. If the board approves this application, staff recommends the following conditions. Number 1, a surveyor will be required to help lay out the footing of the building, and a surveyor's certification must be provided that the building is in compliance with the action of the BZA as well as all other setback requirements. And prior to the meeting, staff discussed with the applicant making, not only having the condition of the driveway easement for 406 South University, but prior to any permits being issued on this property, 410 South University, that driveway easement be recorded for the benefit of 406, so that before either of those 2 lots can be permitted, that driveway easement must be in place. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Mr. Roy Saylor with Habitat for Humanity is here representing his executive director, Ms. Beth Smith, who was not able to attend today. But we'll be happy to answer any questions before or after the public hearing.
All right, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any questions for Mr. Blomley?
Mr. Blomley, as I recall, in October, the issue with 410 was trying to get that property closed and in the name of Habitat. Can I assume by this application that that's been, have they done that now?
Yes, it is now currently owned by Habitat.
So they own both 410 and 406. So the easement issue is really just a matter of getting a document drawn that would meet all the requirements.
That is correct.
Okay.
And Ms. Smith is represented by, or Habitat is represented by Mr. Bill Nelms, and Mr. Ives has been working with Mr. Nelms to achieve that goal.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Mr. Saylor, anything you'd like to add to this application?
Mr. Blomley said pretty much everything we needed to communicate. I don't really have anything to add at this time, unless there's any questions for me, sir.
Mr. Saylor, I have a question, and this has really nothing to do with this application, but I'm just curious how many houses Habitat for Humanity in Rutherford County was built in 2008, approximately?
9, sir.
Okay.
We're running about 8 to 10 a year, and probably will stay there unless the need increases.
We appreciate what y'all do. That is wonderful.
Thanks, sir.
All right, thank you, Mr. Saylor. At this time, then, we'll go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you would, please come forward.
Jonathan Lucas again at 4722 Scottish Drive. I'm for a variance bringing it forward, but I agree with that it should be more of a staggered step. Do you have a map of the plots? Here we go. Okay. Because this one here appears to be stepped back from these two. Is that correct? That this corner lot is set back further?
The center of the small ones is a 10-foot setback, and
Okay.
2 around it are 12 foot.
12 foot. So you're trying to put this one as well 12 foot, correct?
Yeah, that is what we're asking for.
Right. And then the lot that's off the piece of paper is sitting currently at 30 feet? Correct. I mean, I'd strongly advise have this set back somewhere to stagger it, to give the eye appeal is what we're going for here. To have all these pulled up, you still got this lone house sitting 30 feet back, for whatever reason was not granted the setback of variance. So I recommend the council consider that in their drawings. I know they say you can always take back, but from my experience, when you give it, people continue to take it. Hopefully that's not your plan, but it's maybe a little distrust on my part. But that's my recommendation.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lucas. Anyone else wishing to speak for or against this application? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for any further comments, questions, or motion.
Mr. Blomley, I understand that we've got one staff comment about the surveyor laying out the footings. Did I understand your comments to suggest that staff might like a condition that this easement be recorded for 406 as a condition of approval of this? Was that staff's recommendation?
That's correct. We just as another stopgap, we would like that easement recorded before either 406 or 410 are issued building permits.
Yeah, but it's already conditioned on 406, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Unless anybody else has anything else on this, I would move that we approve the setback variance of 18 feet, subject to the staff comments of the surveyor laying out the footing, and an additional comment of having the easement on 410 for the benefit of 406 being recorded as a condition of approval.
Just for, excuse me, Ms. Mosby. Just for clarification, Mr. Dodd, is that motion advocating that they or giving them the leeway to build at either 12 feet or 15 feet away from the front property line, or stating that that it's the preference that they build at 12 feet, even with the,
It's not stating a preference for 12 feet, it's just stating that they could build as close as 12 feet. That was the intent of my motion.
okay, thank you for the clarification.
I'll second the motion.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
I just have a question. If we're giving them the leeway, then who's going to decide that? Or
That if you do give them that leeway, that would be up to them. They could build as close as 12 feet to the front property line, or they could, if they wanted to step it back, that would be their prerogative to do so.
I would, my only comment was I would agree with Mr. Lucas's comment to a degree that the staggering, between a 30 and a 12, if it was staggered, it might have a better look to it, but that would be my only comment.
I think that that habitat, if the 18-foot variance were approved as advertised, then I think they would take that into account, and I think their preference is actually to build it at 15 feet off the front property line. So I think that's even if the 18-foot variance is approved, I think they'll probably go with the 15-foot. Is that correct, Mr. Saylor? Okay.
I just didn't think without an exact house plan, I agree that probably some staggering would be beneficial. I don't know if you want to split the difference, and a lot of that may depend on exactly what kind of house you build, and if you got a porch on it or not, and those sorts of things, so.
Makes sense.
They're in here, they're building in that neighborhood. I think they understand what we're trying to achieve. They want it to look good, I think, too. So.
And that would offer them some flexibility.
Yeah.
All right, any further discussion? Not all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Mr. Saylor, that application's been granted. Thank you. Appreciate what you do and appreciate you coming in today. All right, next item on the agenda under sign variance requests, application S09004 by Mr. Otto J. Diaz, Jr., requesting a variance from Section 25 1/4, 24A22 of the City of Murfreesboro sign ordinance, which prohibits a sign placed in or over a public utility or drainage easement on property located at 1822 East Northfield Boulevard. Ms. Kerr, if you'd review that application, please.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. The applicant, Otto H. Diaz, Jr., is requesting permission to legally establish a previously erected, externally illuminated freestanding wall sign with 19 square foot display area and an overall height of 3 feet 2 inches within a 20-foot drainage easement and a 30-foot water line easement. An agreement for a sign in a City of Murfreesboro easement has been signed by the Murfreesboro Water and Sewer Department, the City of Murfreesboro City Engineer, and the Director of Building and Codes Department. All other setbacks and regulations will apply.
All right, thank you, Ms. Kerr. Any questions from Ms. Kerr?
So we're asking forgiveness on this one. It's already built, right?
Yes, sir. It's already been placed on the property.
And it otherwise complies except for the fact that it sits in the easement.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Kerr. Mr. Diaz, anything you'd like to add to this application, sir?
No, sir.
All right, at this time, then, we'll go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you would please come forward.
Am I the only public here today?
Yeah, I think you are. You're the representative of the public today.
To my name and address again, sir?
Yeah, please.
Jonathan Lucas, 4722 Scottish Drive. My concern here is it was built without requiring the proper approval beforehand, and I hate to see it's easier to ask for forgiveness than ask for permission philosophy come into play here in the City of Murfreesboro. I unfortunately don't know if the rest of the code has been applied with and complied with in this particular sign, but if their variance is granted, then I'm interested to know what punishment, so to speak, any penalties, fines that would be allocated towards him for the improper execution of the building of the sign.
All right. Thank you,
And
Mr.
does it
Lucas.
comply with the road easements, and is that the, it does
I
in those
think
things?
Ms. Kerr is shaking her head. In fact, it does. If you want to answer that, Ms. Kerr.
Sure. The sign does meet all other requirements as far as the penalty that is imposed for someone who erects a sign previous to obtaining a sign permit. It's double the permit fee on the sign itself.
All right.
My question to you is, would you have given this variance if the sign wasn't all the way there? And if you ask yourself and say no, then I say the council makes a determination to not allow it and make them erect it into a lawful and to pay the destruction cost of the current sign.
Anytime the applicant requests to get an approval for an easement, they have to get the consent of the easement holders. And if the easement holders give their consent because the easement was there before the property, the business was built, the easement's there for everybody. So they just have to get permission from or consent from the easement holders to be able to put it there. And if the easement holders give them permission to put it there, then they are allowed to put that sign there with BZA's approval.
It's still dependent on approval from those people. It's not automatic.
Right.
But those approvals have been made, according to Ms. Kerr.
In the past at other locations. Is that correct?
Correct.
And
But
at
not
this
this one.
location.
This one has been made.
It has already
It has
been
already
made.
been.
Yeah.
The consent has been given.
So why are we here today? Maybe that's my clarification. If it's already approved, why are we
Mr.
here?
Lucas, I didn't mean to open a can of worms when I said we're asking for forgiveness. We
No, you
we
didn't, 'cause I was
routine
already thinking that before you said it.
we routinely, in my experience, I've been on the board about a year and a half. I don't know that since the easement holder, who's the only one that, other than us, that has a right to deny that. If they give permission, we routinely give that permission. I can't think of one occasion when I've been on the board that we've denied it in this situation. We see probably at least one or two of these a meeting. It's a pretty common occurrence, but if that helps you.
And the easement holder in this case is the utility company, is that correct?
The easement holder is the Murfreesboro Water and Sewer Department and the City Engineering Department.
Okay.
And to answer your question, Mr. Lucas, our sign ordinance requires that anytime there is a sign proposed to be located in a public utility and drainage easement, that the Board of Zoning Appeals approve the location of the sign. So the requirements are twofold. They must get permission from the easement holder, which they have done in this case, and then after doing so, they must make application to the Board of Zoning Appeals as well.
All right, thank you for the clarification.
All right, anyone else present wishing to speak for or against this application? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for any further discussion, questions, or motion.
I move we approve the application.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
I'm going to vote for this, but again, I'll have to agree with Mr. Lucas. It is, I don't understand if a contractor is made aware of the fact that they've got to permit a sign, and we don't go through that process, and then we just come before here on a forgiveness standpoint. And my understanding that was the contractor was made aware. I would just hope that if you do build another one in this area, in this jurisdiction, you'll know the process that it needs to go through.
All right, absent any further discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Mr. Diaz, that application has been granted. Thank you. Appreciate you coming in today. All right, next item on the agenda, application S09005 by Mr. Kent A. Burns for Oak Park, Tennessee, LP, requesting a variance from Section 25 1/4, 24A22 of the City of Murfreesboro sign ordinance, which prohibits a sign placed in or over a public utility or drainage easement on property located at 1211 Hazelwood Street. And Ms. Kerr, if you'd review that application, please.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. The applicant, Kent Burns, representing Oak Park, Tennessee, LP, is requesting a variance from the City of Murfreesboro sign ordinance which prohibits a foundation or sign placed in or over a public utility or drainage easement without the consent of the easement holder and the Board of Zoning Appeals. The sign is located at 1211 Hazelwood Street at Ashwood Cove Apartments. The applicant is requesting permission to erect one non-illuminated freestanding wall sign with 33 square feet display area and an overall height of 7 feet. The sign location has been field staked and certified by a certified civil engineer and will be located within a 30-foot drainage easement and a 20-foot water line easement. The agreement for a sign in a City of Murfreesboro easement has been signed by the City of Murfreesboro Water and Sewer Department, City of Murfreesboro City Engineer, and the Director of Building and Codes. All other setbacks and regulations will apply.
All right, thank you, Ms. Kerr.
And the applicant is here to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Kerr. Any questions for Ms. Kerr? All right, Mr. Burns, anything you'd like to add to this application, sir? No. All right. At this time, then, we'll go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application?
Public has no comment.
All right, the public says he has no comment. And seeing no others, we'll go ahead and declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for any further discussion, questions, or a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we approve the application.
Motion, is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Mr. Burns, that application has been granted. Thank you. Appreciate you coming in today. All right, next item on the agenda, last item on the agenda, staff reports and other business.
I have nothing.
Goodness. All right.
I have nothing.
That ends a lengthy streak of staff reports and other business.
I could make something up if you'd like me to.
No. There being nothing else, then we are adjourned. Thank you.